9 in the evening, May 7, 1694. The harbor of A Coruña on the northwest coast of Spain. The English call it the Groin. There is no moon. The English warship Charles II rides at anchor in the roadstead, 46 guns, built to hunt French merchantmen in the West Indies. She has been riding here for 5 months. Her crew has been unpaid for 8. Captain Charles Gibson lies below in his stern cabin, shaking with a fever. A longboat slips out of the dark from the frigate James and comes alongside. The men at the oars do not speak. On the deck of the Charles, the first mate leans over the rail, looks down into the boat, and gives the password, low in English. Is the drunken boatswain on board? Ropes go taut, men climb. A pistol is pressed to the temple of the ship's second mate, David Krieg, and a voice tells him that if he resists, he is a dead man. Captain Gibson is woken, still shaking with fever, and offered a lieutenant's commission aboard his own stolen ship. He refuses. 17 loyal men are put over the side in the pinnace with 1 bucket to bail the whole. The anchor cables are cut. The Charles II slips out of Coruña harbor under reduced sail. By dawn, she is gone. The first mate, who has just stolen a 46-gun warship, is named Henry Every. He is about 34 years old. For the next 2 years, he will be the most wanted man alive. This is Black Ensign, the real history of piracy, told from what the records actually say. Henry Every was born at Newton Ferrers, a fishing village in Devon, about 6 miles southeast of Plymouth. The year is usually given as 1659. His father was a small yeoman of the old Devon Every family. His wife, whom he would marry at the Church of St. James in London on September 11, 1690, was Dorothy Arthur, a periwig seller from Ratcliffe Highway. That detail comes from the deposition of one William Phillips, one of Every's own crew, who turned King's evidence after capture. By 1689, Every was a midshipman aboard the 64-gun HMS Rupert under Captain Sir Francis Whaler. He made master's mate, followed Whaler to the 90-gun HMS Albemarle, and was very likely present at the Battle of Beachy Head on July 10, 1690, when the combined Anglo-Dutch fleet was broken by the French off the Sussex coast, the worst English defeat at sea in a generation. 2 months after the battle, Every was discharged. The reason is not recorded. Captain Charles Johnson, writing in 1724, described him as middle-sized, inclinable to be fat and of a jolly complexion, daring and good-tempered, but insolent and uneasy at times, and always unforgiving if at any time imposed upon. That last phrase is worth holding on to. What he did next is the thing the pirate biographers prefer to skim past. Between 1691 and 1693, Every ran slaves from the Guinea coast to the Caribbean. The Royal African Company Master Thomas Phillips wrote in his journal that African traders on the coast had grown shy of English ships, and he blamed one man by name. "I have nowhere upon the coast met the Negroes so shy as here," Phillips wrote, "which makes me fancy they have had tricks played them by such blades as Long Ben, alias Avery, who have seized them and carried them away." Every's technique was to fly friendly colors, invite African brokers aboard to trade, and then clap them in chains in the hold with the men they had come to sell. That is the man standing on the quarterdeck of the Charles II at the Groin. The ship he had just stolen was part of a joint stock venture called the Spanish Expedition Shipping, organized by the London merchant Sir James Houblon, brother of the first governor of the Bank of England. The scheme had seemed clever on paper. England and Spain were allies in the 9 Years' War against France. Carlos II of Spain issued letters of marque to 4 English ships, the Charles, the James, the Dove, and the 7th Son, to sail to the Spanish West Indies, attack French shipping, and salvage treasure from sunken galleons. Houblon guaranteed the crew's wages every 6 months, with the first month paid in advance. The fleet left the Thames in August 1693. It made Coruña late that year and sat there. The Spanish letters patent never arrived. Month followed month. The men's wives petitioned Houblon in London. Houblon refused to pay. He declared the sailors to be wards of the King of Spain. Phillips, who survived, described what Every did with that grievance. He went up and down from ship to ship, Phillips testified, and persuaded the men to come on board him, and he would carry them where they should get money enough. The mutiny had been 6 weeks in planning by the time the pinnace came alongside. 85 men remained aboard the Charles II after Gibson and the loyal hands were cast off. They elected every captain by acclamation, drew up articles on the 1-share, 2-share model, and renamed the ship. From that night forward, she was the Fancy. Over the next 20 minutes, I am going to show you 3 things. I am going to show you how the capture of one Indian pilgrim ship in September 1695 nearly destroyed the English East India Company. I am going to show you how the first worldwide reward ever offered by the English crown reshaped the law of piracy for the next 200 years. And I am going to show you how Henry Every, alone among the pirate captains of his century, walked off the map and vanished. All of it from the Old Bailey trial transcript from the Lords Justice's Proclamation of July 17, 1696, and from the Mughal court historian Khafi Khan, who wrote what he saw. Before we go any further, if this is your kind of history, told from the records rather than the legend, subscribe. A new ensign goes up every week. Now, back to the Fancy and the long run south. The Fancy made her first prizes in the Cape Verde Islands, robbing 3 English merchantmen out of Barbados off the harbor of Mayo, and picking up 9 new volunteers who preferred Every's articles to their own masters. From Cape Verde, she ran down the Guinea coast, flying a friendly English ensign at the mast. An African chieftain came aboard to trade, with his men. Philip Middleton, a teenage cabin boy on the Fancy, who would later turn King's evidence, described what happened next. They took their gold, Middleton said, and tied them with chains and put them into the hold. At Bioko, in the Bight of Benin, the crew careened the Fancy, scraped her hull clean, and razed her. They cut down her upper works to reduce weight and windage. The result was one of the fastest square-rigged ships in the Atlantic. By October, off the Portuguese island of Principe, the Fancy took 2 Danish merchantmen. 17 Danes volunteered to join her crew. By early 1695, she had rounded the Cape of Good Hope and was lying off the island of Johanna in the Comoros, where 40 more men from a French pirate crew came aboard. Henry. Every now commanded 150 armed men in a 46-gun frigate with no allegiance to any flag. Before he left Johanna, he wrote a letter. It is the most famous single pirate document of the 17th century. He left it in the hands of the local ruler to be passed to the next East India Company captain that came through. The letter survives in the archives at Kew, dated February 28, 1694, which is the old style of February 28, 1695. To all English commanders, Every wrote, "Let this satisfy that I was riding here at this instant in the ship Fancy, man of war, formerly the Charles of the Spanish expedition, who departed from Corunna the 7th of May, 94. I am now in a ship of 46 guns and 150 men, and bound to seek our fortunes. I have never as yet wronged any English or Dutch, nor never intend while I am commander." And he laid out a private signal, a furled ensign hoisted in a ball at the mizzen peak, by which any English ship could make herself known at a distance and pass unmolested. He signed off, "As yet an Englishman's friend, Henry Every." A few months later, that promise would become worthless. By August 1695, Every had brought the Fancy up to the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, the narrow gate between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, where the pilgrim fleet of the Mughal Empire passed every year on its return from Mecca. 5 more pirate ships joined him there off Perim Island. Thomas Tew in the Amity, Joseph Farrow in the Portsmouth Adventure, Richard Want in the Dolphin, William Mays in the Pearl, Thomas Wake in the Susanna, Every was elected admiral over the older two. The combined squadron now mustered over 440 men. The pilgrim convoy of 25 ships slipped past in the dark. The pirates gave chase. First caught was the escort ship Fateh Muhammad, owned by the richest merchant of Surat, a man named Abd-ul-Ghaffar, who was said to drive a trade equal to the entire East India Company. She yielded roughly 50,000 pounds in gold and silver. It was in the fight with Fateh Muhammad that Thomas Tew was disemboweled by a single round shot. Tew's crew lost heart and scattered. Every did not scatter. 8 days out of Surat, at first light on September 7, 1695, the Fancy caught the flagship of the Pilgrim fleet. She was called Ganj-e-Sawai, the exceeding treasure, and she was the largest ship in the Mughal Empire, about 1,600 tons. 80 guns according to Khafi Khan, 400 armed guards under a captain named Muhammad Ibrahim, 600 passengers, including pilgrims returning from Mecca, and, by the company's own report, a great Umbra's wife, a noblewoman related to the emperor, traveling in her old age. The Ganj-e-Sawai had been built by order of Aurangzeb's own mother. She was carrying, by some contemporary accounts, 325,000 pounds in treasure. By others, 600,000. In modern value, between $200 million and $400 million. The battle lasted about 2 hours. 2 accidents decided it. The Fancy's opening broadside, fired from close range, cut through the Ganj-e-Sawai's main mast and brought it down across her deck in a tangle of spars and canvas. At nearly the same moment, one of the Mughal ship's own great guns, overloaded by an inexperienced gun crew, burst in its cradle, killing the men working it and blowing a hole in the upper works. The smell of scorched linen and blackened flesh would have been instant. Khafi Khan, the Mughal court historian who was working as a clerk in the company's own Bombay office at the time, and who had eyewitness sources on both sides, wrote that Captain Ibrahim then ran below decks, armed a group of Turkish slave girls he was transporting as a gift for the court at Delhi, and sent them up to fight in his place. Leaderless, the Mughal guards' resistance collapsed within the hour. The pirates scaled the side by boarding nets, pistols in their belts, cutlasses in their teeth, and took her. What happened aboard the Ganj-e-Sawai over the next 2 days is the part the records do not let us look away from. Sir John Gayher, Governor of Bombay, wrote to the Lords of Trade in London on October 12, 1695. It is certain the pirates, Gayher wrote, did do very barbarously by the people of the Gunsway, to make them confess where their money was, and there happened to be a great Umbra's wife, related to the king, returning from her pilgrimage to Mecca, in her old age. She they abused very much, and forced several other women, which caused one person of quality, his wife and nurse, to kill themselves to prevent the husbands seeing them ravished. Philip Middleton, the cabin boy, confirmed it under oath. Many of the pirates Middleton deposed did lay with the women on board. Khafi Khan, writing in Persian for a Mughal audience, recorded the aftermath. Some of the women, getting an opportunity, threw themselves into the sea to save their honor, while others committed suicide using knives and daggers. When the Fancy finally let the Ganj-e-Sawai go, each ordinary seaman's share of the plunder came to about 1,000 pounds. That is roughly $200,000 per man today. 180 men shared the cash. Every took a captain's double share, plus an uncounted weight of jewels. Here is what the general history of the pirates does not tell you, and here is why it does not tell you. The story we inherit, the one printed in the ballads and played on the stage of Drury Lane in 1712, is that Henry Every became the pirate king, that he ruled an island kingdom in Madagascar, that he married the daughter of the Mughal emperor, that he commanded a fleet of his own. All of it fiction, all of it written after the fact to make the theft of 600,000 pounds into something romantic. The real story is that the raid on the Ganj-e-Sawai was the first time in English history that a single act of theft triggered a full-scale international diplomatic crisis, and it nearly destroyed the East India Company. When the Fateh Mohammed limped into Surat harbor on September 11th and the shattered Ganj-i-Sawai 2 days later, the governor of Surat, a man named Itimad Khan, placed the English factory under armed guard. The guard became a cordon. The cordon became a prison. Samuel Annesley, the East India Company's president at Surat, and 63 of his Englishmen were put in irons, chained 3 to a cell, and held there for 9 months. One of them was stoned to death by a mob in the street. Annesley, writing to Gayer, was bitter. "Were we pirates," he wrote, "would we rob under our own colors and tell everybody who we were? No. Rather, if we had plundered the ship, we should have sunk her." In Delhi, the Emperor Aurangzeb ordered every English factory in the Mughal dominions closed. Surat, Bombay, Masulipatinam. He considered ordering the expulsion of every European from his empire. The company was, in that autumn of 1695, about 5 weeks away from losing India entirely. It was Aurangzeb's own admiral, a man named Kazim Khan, who talked him out of it. The English, Kazim Khan wrote to the throne, "are great merchants and drive a vast trade in your country. There are a great many hatmen thieves in these seas, but such business is not from the English caste, nor will ever be." In other words, the admiral told the emperor, "Hang the hatmen, but spare the company." The price was a humiliating one. The East India Company was required, along with the Dutch and the French, to provide armed naval escort every year for the Mughal pilgrim fleet. The company also had to pay reparations and publicly hunt Henry Every to his grave. That hunt is the reason the phrase "first global manhunt" exists in English. Until 1696, the English state had never issued a coordinated worldwide reward for a single man. The company posted £500. The Crown matched it with another 500. The combined bounty on Every was £1,000, with £50 for each ordinary member of his crew. In a year, when a skilled London craftsman earned about £30, that was astronomical. The Lords Justices' Proclamation, signed at Whitehall on July 17, 1696, went out under the hand of the Archbishop of Canterbury and 5 earls of the realm, and was distributed to every English colonial governor in North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and India, and to the courts of the Dutch Republic and Denmark and Portugal. Simultaneous distribution, unified reward. One man, named and described, wanted on 4 continents. There had never been anything like it. The hunt was coordinated by Sir Charles Hedges, Judge of the High Court of Admiralty, and the newly created Board of Trade, founded just 2 months earlier. And yet, for all of that, the hunt failed. The Fancy, by the time the proclamation was printed, had already sailed into the harbor of New Providence in the Bahamas under a false flag. Every, calling himself Captain Henry Bridgman, sent 4 men ashore with a letter and £860 in gold for the island's governor, Sir Nicholas Trott. Trott's annual salary was less than £300. Every then gifted him the Fancy itself, along with 50 tons of elephant tusks and 100 barrels of gunpowder. When the royal proclamation finally reached Trott, he issued the warrant, but he tipped the pirates off first. The Fancy was abandoned. The crew scattered. Some went north to Philadelphia, where Lieutenant Governor William Markham took £100 per man to issue pardons, and where one of Every's pirates, a man named James Brown, married Markham's daughter and was then elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly. Some went to New York, where Governor Benjamin Fletcher had been selling pirate commissions for years. Some went to Rhode Island, where Arabic silver coins dated 1693 have been turning up in the soil around Middletown since the year 2014, minted in Yemen, exactly where the Ganj-i-Sawai had taken on her treasure. Every himself, with a handful of trusted men, including Philip Middleton and John Dann, boarded a sloop called the Seaflower in May 1696, and sailed not for the Americas, but for Ireland. In late June, the Seaflower made landfall at the village of Dunfanaghy in County Donegal on the wild north coast, and the men scattered inland. John Dann went to England. carrying 1,045 pounds in Arabian gold sequins sewn into the lining of his waistcoat, plus 10 English guineas. Dann put up at the Bull Inn at Rochester in Kent on the night of July 30, 1696. The chambermaid who turned down his bed felt the weight of the gold through the cloth and reported him to the mayor. Dann was arrested before breakfast. 3 days later, he turned King's evidence. His deposition, taken at the Tower of London and still preserved in the state papers, is the spine of the case the Crown was about to bring. The ship's company mutinied at Corunna for want of their pay, Dann told his interrogators, there being 8 months due to them. About 2 days after we were lying at anchor at St. John's, there was a great ship called the Gunsway, and we weighed anchor and fought her about 2 hours, and took her and plundered her. They took out of that ship, Dann said, so much gold and silver in coined money and plate as made up each man's share, with what they had taken before, about 1,000 pounds a man, there being 180 that had their dividends. With Dann's testimony in hand, the Crown went to trial at the Old Bailey on October 19, 1696. 6 of Every's crew were in the dock: Joseph Dawson, Edward Forsyth, William May, William Bishop, James Lewis, John Sparks. On the bench sat Sir Charles Hedges. Next to him, the Lord Chief Justice of England, Sir John Holt. Next to Holt, the Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, Sir George Treby. It was the heaviest legal panel an English piracy case had ever assembled. The prosecution's opening, given by Dr. Thomas Newton, made plain what was on trial. For suffer pirates, Newton told the jury, and the commerce of the world must cease. If they shall go away unpunished, the consequence may be to involve the nations concerned in war and blood, to the destruction of the innocent English in those countries, the total loss of the Indian trade, and thereby the impoverishment of this kingdom. A not guilty verdict here, in other words, would not only free 6 men, it would lose India. John Grevet, the former second mate of the Charles II, testified to what he had seen the night of the mutiny. I was upon my watch upon the deck, Grevet said, and the carpenter seized me, and took me by the throat, and clapped a pistol to me, and said, if I resisted, I was a dead man. David Krieg, Grevet's fellow officer, gave the courtroom its single most quoted line. Krieg told the jury that on the night of the mutiny, the carpenter of the Fancy had turned to Henry Every, and pointed at the men standing by him. Do you not see this cock? Yes, Krieg answered, I do. Says he, this man, and old May, and Knight, I can trust with anything. They are true cocks of the game, and old sportsmen. The first trial was a disaster for the Crown. The indictment charged piracy against the Ganjai Sawai, and the jury, for reasons nobody in court quite understood, came back with a verdict of not guilty on every count. Some historians think the jurors could not get past the idea that the Mughal subjects were not within the protection of English law. Some think they were sympathetic to unpaid English sailors. Whatever the reason, the courtroom emptied in stunned silence. The Admiralty adjourned. It issued fresh warrants. It convened a second trial on a narrower charge, the mutiny at Corunna, an act of piracy against an English ship in European waters, committed by English hands. Indisputable. Before the new jury on October 31, Hedges gave what is probably the most important judicial charge in the history of pirate law. Now piracy, Hedges said, is only a sea term for robbery. The King of England has not only an empire and sovereignty over the British seas, but also an undoubted jurisdiction and power, in concurrency with other princes and states, for the punishment of all piracies and robberies at sea, in the most remote parts of the world. So that if any person whatsoever, he went on, native or foreigner, Christian or infidel, Turk or pagan, with whose country we hold trade and correspondence, shall be robbed or spoiled, it is piracy within the cognizance of this court. That doctrine, the doctrine of the pirate, As the enemy of all mankind, the phrase the Romans used of the barbarian raider would harden inside 2 years into the Piracy Act of 1698, and from there into the foundation stone of modern international law. It rules piracy cases still. The second trial convicted all 6 men. Hedges pronounced sentence, that you and every one of you be taken from hence to the place from whence you came, and from thence to the place of execution, and that there you and every one of you be hanged by the necks, until you and every one of you be dead. And the Lord have mercy upon you. On November 25, 1696, 5 of the 6 were brought in the cart from Newgate Prison through the City of London and across the Thames to the execution dock at Wapping, at the low water mark. The Admiralty Marshal rode before them carrying the silver oar, the symbol of the High Court of Admiralty's jurisdiction over the sea. A crowd filled the riverbank and the wharves, and waited on the anchored barges in the pool. The rope at Wapping was kept deliberately short to prolong the death. By custom, the bodies were left hanging until 3 tides had washed over them. The most notorious were afterwards gibbeted in chains at Blackwall or Bugsby's Reach or Tilbury Point, as a warning to sailors heading downriver to sea. William Bishop, aged 21, had pleaded his youth in court. "I was forced away," he had said, "and when I went was but 18 years old." William May had pleaded his long service in the Navy. But it was the youngest of them, John Sparks, who gave the scaffold speech that the Newgate Ordinary, the Reverend Paul Lorraine, wrote down. Sparks said that the piracy itself was of lesser concern to him. It was the inhuman treatment and merciless tortures inflicted on the poor Indians and their women, he said, that still affected his soul. His eyes were now open to his crimes. He justly suffered death, he said, for such inhumanity, though only on the bodies of the heathen. Joseph Dawson, who had confessed and turned king's evidence, was reprieved at the last moment. Only 24 of Every's 113 men were ever taken. Henry Every was not one of them. The legal aftermath was fundamental. 2 years after the Wapping executions, Parliament passed the Piracy Act of 1698. Its preamble spoke directly to the lesson of the Every case. Persons committing piracies in places very remote, the preamble reads, cannot be brought to condign punishment without great trouble and charges in sending them into England. The new act created vice-admiralty commissions in every colony, allowed piracy trials without common law juries, and made anyone who sheltered or bribed or traded with a pirate equally guilty as a principal. A second Piracy Act in 1721 would extend liability further still. The Trotts and Fletchers of the colonial coast were now on notice. The long sunset of the pirate nests had begun. The East India Company factories at Surat reopened slowly between 1696 and 1699. The company emerged from the crisis armed. Its India men were fitted with more guns. Bombay was permitted to fortify and to raise troops, creating what would become the Bombay Marine, ancestor of the Indian Navy. One pirate raid had forced the company to evolve from a trading house into something closer to a military state. From that evolution runs the road, through the Mughal Farman of 1717 to the Battle of Plassey in 1757, to the formal establishment of company rule in India. The line from the burst cannon of the Ganges Sawai to the British Raj is not a straight one, but it is traceable, and Every himself, the man who had triggered all of it, walked into a fog bank of rumor and never came out. The most credible account, written by Captain Charles Johnson in 1724, says Every tried to sell his diamonds to a syndicate of Bristol merchants, who cheated him, that he retreated, under a false name, to the Devon town of Bideford, that he died there, not being worth, in Johnson's words, as much as would buy him a coffin. In October 1781, the Collector of Customs at St. Ives, a man named John Nill, recorded that a living descendant had told him Every had died in Barnstaple and been buried as a pauper. Other stories put him in Ireland, under an alias, spending the rest of his life in a small cottage in County Donegal, not far from the cove where the Seaflower had landed. A newer theory, based on the Arabian coins surfacing in Rhode Island since 2014, has him routing back through New England to launder his plunder before crossing to Ireland. The pirate king of Madagascar, the Mughal princess wife, the island kingdom with its own fleet and its own currency, those were inventions. Daniel Defoe and Charles Johnson and the pamphleteers of the Grub Street Press built them to sell. While it was said he was aspiring at a crown, Johnson wrote in 1724, he wanted a shilling. That is where we ought to leave him. The beach at Dunfanaghy in County Donegal is still there. The sand is pale, the wind off the Atlantic is constant. There is no monument, no plaque. Local tradition points vaguely to a few foundations on the hillside where the sloop's men are said to have spent their first night ashore. The stones are probably older than that. Certainly nothing remains of Henry, Every himself. No grave, no ledger, no certain date of death. A man who looted one ship for what today would be $400 million, and then walked into an Irish June evening and did not come back out. The sea keeps its own ledger. Not everything makes it in. If you made it this far, a like on this one helps more than the algorithm admits. Thanks for sitting with me through it.